So I'll come back to you on that, and I'll read a bit of really what it means to declare a state of emergency as spelled out in the Emergency Powers Act 1994, Act 472. We'll go into that, but I want you, Mr. Tsikata, to respond briefly to what Mr. Ayiko Otu said earlier, that indeed before the 2024 general election, there were officials, top officials of the NDC, including the now sitting president, who were, making the pronouncement that they were going to be very tough on illegal mining. In fact, there's an article which was published exactly on the 9th of September 2025, where the president met some religious leaders and said that, yes, dealing with galamsey would be a formidable challenge, but it demands strong political will. The concerns of a lot of people is that, yes, you're just 9 months into power, but you don't seem to have had the strong will enough to deal with this situation head on, as you made us believe ahead of the 2024 general election.
Well, I'm not a spokesperson.
Certainly, but
I'm not a spokesperson for any of the people who may have made utterances. But I want us to just assess the facts that are a matter of public knowledge. Those facts include the reality that has just been explained, that virtually all over Ghana, there's illegal mining activity. So there is a scale of the problem which, has to be taken into consideration. Now, in taking that into consideration, I mean, Mr. Poku mentioned the availability of military or other personnel, security personnel to cope with the situation and so on. But you see, I think that is looking at it too narrowly from the perspective of just enforcement action, because something of this nature can't be dealt with by just deploying troops or by just, and that's why in my mind, if you just started, I mean, it would be the easiest thing for the president to say, I'm declaring a state of emergency because of galamsey. That's a proclamation he can make under the constitutional and the statutory provisions.
Yes.
But even after you make that declaration, how are you going to implement your enforcement capabilities? And what is the capacity that you have, both in terms of even the state of the economy that we have, the resources that are available to the government, to be able to deploy in that manner? But I think there's an even more severe problem that we should deal with. You see, declaring a state of emergency, and you will notice that in the Constitution, emergency powers are dealt with in the chapter that has to do with human rights. When you declare a state of emergency, it actually gives the power to the president to do things which in the normal course he would not have the ability to do. So I think that people should be very careful in some of these demands about a state of emergency and so on. Because you ask yourself, do you really want the executive, the president, to have unusual powers that he can use, in respect of a state of emergency? In my view, honestly, I can't see a real justification for just making a declaration of a state of emergency and assuming that through that you will have satisfied people that you're giving urgent consideration to galamsey.
So let me read that a bit of the Emergency Powers Act 1994, Act 472. And when you look at Article 31 and 32 of the 1992 Constitution, you seem to have similar writings as well. So just a bit of that. Section 1 says, declaration of a state of emergency. The president may, acting in accordance with the advice of the Council of State, by proclamation published in the Gazette, declare that a state of emergency exists in Ghana or in any part of Ghana. Section 2 says Parliament has to be informed, and then Parliament shall within 72 hours after being so notified decide whether the proclamation should remain in force or should be revoked, and the President shall act in accordance with the decision of Parliament. And it says Section 3, talking about the duration of a state of emergency, says 1. A declaration of a state of emergency shall cease to have effect at the expiration of a period of 7 days, beginning with the date of publication of the declaration, unless before the expiration of that period it is approved by resolution passed for that purpose by a majority of all the members of Parliament. And then when you look at the subject to the subsection 2 of section 4, declaration of state emergency approved by resolution of Parliament shall continue in force until the expiration of a period of 3 months, beginning with the date of it being so approved. You talked about the consequences of declaring a state of emergency, and I just wanted to just go through that, and I'll go back to Mr. Francis Poku, because you seem to disagree with those who are asking for the declaration of a state of emergency because perhaps they may not necessarily know the effects it may have when indeed that is done. Okay, I will have to look for that, but it is also within that. It says where a person is restricted or detained pursuant to declaration of a state of emergency, the following provision shall apply. So it restricts movement of people, deployment of security agencies and all of that. But again, I was referring to Article 31, which really tells you that when there is a natural disaster or something that the country finds as a crisis, and it deprives people of their right to certain amenities, then there should be that declaration of a state of emergency. So you wouldn't agree with what Mr. Francis Poku said, that indeed this has become an existential threat. And looking at even what our constitution says, we should be able to do that.
No, it can be an existential threat, but the way to deal with an existential threat is not necessarily to declare a state of emergency, because when you declare a state of emergency, it is to enable you to do something which you would not otherwise have been able to do. So if you can deploy, troops or whatever, or if you can engage community, if you can engage, the nation as a whole, if you can mobilize community support against galamsey, but there have been important things done. Look, let's not behave as if nothing has been done in the effort to deal with galamsey. There has been a decisive intervention in relation to some of this mining in forest areas, for instance. There's been an end brought to some of the activities. It's been visible. People who were engaged in it have been stopped. There has been a process of seizing excavators and so on for people undertaking mining in protected forest areas, which they were not entitled to do. And, there's a process now, for instance, of trying to register the excavators, ensure that you can track them wherever they may be deployed and so on. So, steps are being taken. Of course, the society rightly believes that the steps are not sufficient, but they are not sufficient because of the scale of the problem and because of the way that some people want to keep it going. If you have a problem which, only a few people are interested in protecting, it's easier to focus on attacking the problem around those few people. But if you have a problem which a lot of people are engaged in creating for you, then you really got to sit back and make sure that the measures that you're taking are going to be effective. It's not a matter of just